Welcome to the Missouri Instructional Leaders Network, where we bring together Missouri instructional leaders to share their experiences, grow professional relationships, and build curriculum and instruction skills. This morning, we have a very special guest with us, Jocelyn Strand from DESE's Office of Quality Schools. She's going to give us some updates on MSIP 6, and as she is sharing info today, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we will do our best to get them answered. So Jocelyn, thank you so much for being with us, and I'll let you take it away.
Terrific. Thank you, Valerie, and thank you for having me back. I keep thinking that maybe that's gonna, go by the wayside or something. I don't know. Accountability is not always a good like feel good measure conversation, but it's what I do every day, and it's a conversation we have about how to use data to improve schools, and the fact that accountability is no longer just points-based state accountability, a points-based system that we're looking at just how you did on your assessments, but we've also incorporated the continuous improvement in. So since we're going to be releasing the secure version of the APR Monday, it's a perfect opportunity for me to be able to visit with you a little bit about what you can expect to see this year, and any questions you might have related to that. And I know federal accountability really isn't on the radar, but maybe even have a little bit of a conversation about where we're going with that particular item. So first of all, just wanted to start with probably what, if there are any K-8 districts on with us today, one of the biggest things is that the high school readiness measure has been modified. If you've heard me speak before, you may have heard that information. Previously, it was just the end of course assessments that could be utilized for the high school readiness measure. But for this year, and we've had many conversations with our stakeholders about the concern that not all students are ready for that advanced content before they enter high school. And so we made a change after listening to our stakeholders that would allow K-8 districts to utilize either grade level English, language arts, or math proficiency, or end of course English, language arts, or math proficiency to demonstrate that they had met the high school readiness standard. We think that's the right thing to do for our school districts, and it's also a measure of whether or not they're prepared for the next step of their educational journey. So that's a pretty significant change, and you can expect to see that information included in the APR. The second change that we've made is to modify the KEA and ICAP participation rates. That particular change is more in line with the work that we do for every other standard. It puts the participation rate at 95% rather than 100%. Which simply allows districts the flexibility that if they have a child that enters very close to the end of the window allowed for utilizing the KEA or implementing that, or they come to you very late in the school year related to the ICAP without time to complete that work, that you have some flexibility. And then one change that impacts everyone, that is a fairly sizable change, is there is statutory language that provides that English language students, your English learners, unless they have been in a school building that is primarily speaking English, and they have been there for 3 years or less, that they not be counted in the assessment component of the annual performance report. So if you have English learners who have been with you less than 36 months. And the reason I'm using the 36 months is because that's our proxy for that measure. It's how your district reports that data as part of the MOSIS core data process. Those students will be removed from your annual performance report data. There is no provision of the law that allows us to count them even if they are proficient. So you'll notice that when you see that data for accountability purposes, there's going to be a difference between the number of students you assessed, because you still have to assess them for federal accountability purposes, and whether or not we can use them at the state level. So again, if they've been in country essentially less than 36 months, they will be removed from the performance data for your APR. And then finally, the other change that you can expect to see is just a change to the reporting. And it's a very simple change. What you saw last year, it will look exactly the same. That report is now called the supporting data report, because we have 2 years worth of data. It will summarize this year's data, and it will also have a supporting report that will give you the information for last year, just points possible, points earned, percentage of points earned, and then that same information for the 2023 APR. So as I mentioned earlier, the secure release is going to be Monday. We do have kind of a time slot. I would encourage you to maybe give us a little bit of time in the morning to make sure that everything goes. And then we'll do some of the same work we've always done prior to the public release, which is have conversations with superintendents and the press, so that when the public release happens on the 18th, the groundwork has been laid for that release. Superintendents have an opportunity to ask any questions about the annual performance report, and the press knows what they can expect in terms of changes when they compare, because they will, to the 2022 report. So that is kind of a brief summary of what's happening related to the MSIP 6 calculation, the release of the annual performance report. Valerie, if we want to take questions related to MSIP now, and then we can talk a little bit about federal accountability.
Sure. So if any of our members, either you could unmute or you could put them in the chat if you have any questions about those updates she provided. Can you go back over what you stated about the supporting data report?
Certainly. So last year, with the first year of the MSIP 6 APR, we released essentially a one-page document, and it was called the MSIP 6 summary report, because it was 1 year, and all of the information was included in that one-page document. Because every annual performance report is a 1-year document, we wanted to provide our stakeholders with an opportunity to see multiple years of data on the same page, at least the summary data. So last year, so for 2023, what was last year the summary report is now the supporting data report. Okay. And we have a new document, a new report called the 2023 APR summary report. And that is essentially both years. It contains the points possible, the points earned, and the percentage of points earned. So that if somebody wants to see that information, but they don't want to know all of the details, they can just pull that particular report up, see where the district has been for the last 2 years, and be able to have a feel for where they might be. And next year we'll add the third year before we make classification recommendations.
Thank you for that clarification. Good question, Amanda. Any other questions regarding the update so far?
Hi, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just retired as a principal before I moved to Step Up. And I remember there was a lot of emphasis with MSIP 6 being put on the growth that you saw, which is why you compared 2 school years. Can you speak to that just a little bit?
Certainly. So there's still quite a bit of emphasis. Well, there's still a lot of emphasis on the growth data. That has not changed. The state board made it very clear that they believe that both status and growth were equally important. And so that's how we moved forward with the scoring. So if you'll recall in MSIP 5, perhaps the biggest change from MSIP 5 to MSIP 6 was the fact that we no longer stacked points. So if you were a high performing district, it was relatively easy for you to earn all of the points by adding progress and growth to it. Essentially what it does in MSIP 6 is it separates those two and you earn points individually. They're no longer stacked. And that will continue to be the case throughout MSIP 6. This year, and I forgot to mention this, we did add growth for science and social studies at the high school level only. So social studies is only a high school assessment. Science is at the elementary and middle school levels, but we have not incorporated the science piece into the elementary science into the science growth model yet.
Do you foresee at some point they will include the elementary? Or
I believe they will, and they've been working on that this year. So we wanted them to complete the science and social studies at the high school, and we have asked them to continue their work with modeling the elementary science as well.
We have another
question. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Okay, so with adding the growth model to the high school, are they taking that and applying growth to students that they've seen at the elementary level, at the middle school at 8th grade level, and then into high school? How are they calculating that at the high school level is my question.
Okay, that's a great question. And actually we've had a lot of conversations about this lately. We are, so how they calculate growth at the high school is very similar to how they calculate it for our elementary students in the grade level assessment, but they look back to the assessment that the student took prior. So they are looking back to those 8th grade assessments. Even at the grade level, they look at math and the other assessment data when they're calculating the projection for growth for that student. And so they are continuing to use that same modeling process for the end of course assessment. So they're looking at both ELA and math content as they work to create those projections.
Thank you so much. And one other quick question. So I'm just making sure I understand it. It's going to be using the 8th grade score to predict their high school growth score, not the elementary 5th grade one.
Right. That's correct. It will use the 8th grade score.
That makes sense. And then at the high school level, like in the past, growth, we have mostly gotten that growth from the 3-8 levels for math and ELA. Is that going to be included at the high school or just science?
It will, and you just asked me like a trick question. For whatever reason, my mind just went blank on that. Definitely science and social studies. I need to double check. That sounds silly, but I need to double check that. I'll let Valerie know, and she can share that with the members as a follow-up email.
Yeah, perfect. And since social studies is a high school only assessment, how will they calculate growth for that?
They do it, they calculate social studies essentially the same way. Is they look at the other assessments as a predictor. Actually utilizing those assessments in other content areas is a good predictor for all of the content for students making growth. And so, and for the way the Missouri value added model works, growth model works, then they can still utilize those 8th grade assessments as a predictor for how well a student would do, and create that predicted score for social studies.
Okay, so if our students don't take a 6-8 social studies assessment for a state assessment. So what assessment are they using to pull for that?
ELA and math.
Okay, got it. Okay. I just want to make sure I was understanding you. Thank you. That answers my question.
Yep.
So we have a couple questions in the chat. One is a clarifying question. The APR is coming out on Monday, and just making sure we understand this. Students who have been in the country for less than 3 years will be excluded from that report.
Correct. In the assessment data only.
Is that pulled from DESE from their core data? Is there anything that they need to submit for that? I hope I'm
No,
not.
there's not. We pull that from the in-country less than 36 months that's reported as part of your MOSIS core data. What I think I've encouraged this group before, and I'm going to do so again now. It's really critical that when your district is reporting the data, that the person who is entering that data and reporting that data understands how those pieces work together. So for instance, in country less than 36 months, that's not necessarily a required field. It may say optional, it may say conditional. And people really need to understand how that functions. So somebody in a district should probably be very familiar with the comprehensive guide and some of the guidance that we're providing districts about how critical it is to make the connection between what you report and what gets generated. So how does the reporting in country less than 36 months impact your APR? Because sometimes there is a disconnect there. That person's just entering data that they've been given. They need to understand, and the districts need to understand what the impact of that data entry is. And they can appeal during the appeals window, which was previous. So there is an opportunity for districts to make corrections to their data during the appeals window, but that will not be possible. It's just not possible at this point in order to generate the final report.
Okay, thank you. I think you've already kind of answered this, but for the social studies, there is no current elementary social studies test. Are there any plans to have one in the future?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. When will districts receive the ranking orders to calculate their growth measures on their end?
So the districts already have access to the VAM files. That's the value added information. It is in the secure portal, the MCDS portal, and you can go ahead and be reviewing that information currently.
Will there be a list of all districts and what their APR scores are for comparative purposes?
That information does actually get posted. Is a spreadsheet. There is a variety of information that comes along with the APR release. We focus very heavily on the APR release, but we also know that the information school districts are really looking for is contained in some of those other reports that come out at the same time. And so they may not release on the secure release date, which is Monday, but it will be available on the 18th. And there are a variety of reports that come out at that time. And that is one of them.
Kind of follow up to that is, where can that be found and what is that report called?
Okay, so it can be found in the MCDS portal. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pull it up to look at it. There are a number of files that get released at the district level. It will be titled something very similar to performance level report. And right now, districts can access their 22 data in the BAM. It's in the download section. So if you're looking, I have shared capability, right? I will just be careful. So if you're looking at the if you're looking at the screen I'm showing you now, I'm going to back up here a little bit. Up at the top of the screen, if you can see where it says data download, I know it's kind of hard to see.
We see your Windows Explorer. Is that what you meant to show us?
Nope, it's not.
Okay.
So we're gonna stop sharing. You shouldn't be seeing that. You should be seeing the screen that I actually selected, which is this one. All right. Okay, do you see something that says data download?
Yes.
Perfect. That's what you should be seeing. Okay, up at the top where you see data download.
Yep.
If you pick your county district code, and if you have secure access, it will give you an opportunity to select this information. And when you click on the download, it will have a variety of information. So I'm looking at the 2022 data. For whatever reason, it doesn't want to show me what's there. It is a list of files.
We're still seeing the data download screen.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
a list of files. There's about 6 or 7 of them that are included. It's not in the share wanting me to do that, so I'll stop that. Let it open back up. And maybe not. We have people working in the portal today, so it may be the reason why it will not open.
And so next Monday, if we were to go in there, we would have the choice of the 2023 data.
Yes, for you can actually right now, if you went in there, there will be 2022 data in there. There you will actually have an option for 23 data now. There is 23 data located in there. It's not the APR specific, but it is all of the growth data that's available there.
Great. Okay. That was all of our questions in the chat about those particular updates.
Okay. So we're also working at the current time on federal accountability related issues. So, oh, that's a great question about ranking orders. So, by state law, we do have to rank the top 5 and the bottom 5. That information is located on the report card and it will be posted on the report card. The spreadsheets will have information for every district in the state, so you can rank order them yourselves once you have access to that spreadsheet. So we're working also on some pretty significant changes to the state's consolidated plan for federal accountability. The identification of comprehensive, targeted, and additional targeted support schools. So if anybody's interested, I'm happy to give you a quick overview of what those changes are. As many of you know, we had a very large number of districts that were identified in the first process for targeted status in special education, and we had some pretty significant concerns about that. And the step size for exiting those buildings was large. It was like 3.7 and 4.1 for ELA and math. And the issue wasn't really how many schools were identified. It makes sense to identify schools if they're performing like that, student groups where they're not performing. But we were talking about special education students, and the population for the group of total was 1.6 step size, and special ed was 4.1 or 3.7. That's quite a difference, right? So we are making some changes to not to the interim goals and measures of progress. In order for our students, including our special education students, to hit those proficiency measures, it really is necessary to have that step size. But after speaking with the U.S. Department of Ed, we believe that we have enough flexibility in the law to say we'll report against those measures in the report card. So we will tell you what the target is, and we'll show you where the school is, but we will not measure against that. So when we run the lists, what we will be measuring a school's exit on is whether or not they demonstrated improvement and whether or not they stayed out of the identification process. So let's say the Jocelyn School District was identified and as a targeted school, and they've been in targeted status for 2 years without exit, right? They will move to ATSI status. But let's say that Jocelyn School makes pretty significant progress, and their proficiency rates are up and their MPI is up, and they are not at the index score that we use for identification, then they'll be able to exit. We'll exit them regardless of whether or not they made that step size. So that's what we're proposing to the U.S. Department of Ed, is to give us as the state agency the flexibility to say they're demonstrating progress in every sense of the word. We'll report against those interim goals, interim targets, and measurable objectives, but we're not going to hold the school in an identification status indefinitely because they fail to meet the step size. If they're demonstrating that improvement, we want to be able to go ahead and exit them so that we can focus on schools that really do need the assistance, as opposed to trying to spread our resources out to half of our schools, or at some point all of our schools, because we didn't make that change. So that's pretty significant. And then most of the changes are relatively small. There is a provision that we have in our plan that says if a student completes all of the approved end of course assessments prior to high school entry, then they would have to have a plan, a personal plan that the district would submit to us for advanced content in mathematics. And the U.S. Department of Ed will no longer approve that. So if you have a student who takes Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry before they ever enter high school, then their plan becomes you have to assess them in math on either the ACT or the SAT. That's essentially how that works. So that is how we will move forward with that. And then there were changes to the McKinney-Vento homeless dispute resolution process. And I won't get into the details because the changes are numerous, but to summarize them, it's really about providing clear guidance for our parents and students, unaccompanied youth, and stakeholders and districts about how many days they have in the process, right? So sometimes our guidance said you have 10 days. It didn't say 10 business days, it just said 10 days. So the changes to that are to provide a clearer picture for those folks who may have the least ability to understand the timing, particularly for unaccompanied youth. So that is probably the most significant change there. We have presented that information at a number of conferences, but the U.S. Department of Ed does require that we seek stakeholder feedback. And so if you went to the Office of Quality Schools under federal accountability, there is an opportunity to provide feedback, and we're taking feedback for 3 weeks. So I think until December 20th is the date. We think it's a good modification for our districts, and we hope that our stakeholders think so as well. So that's kind of where we are. This year, we only are identifying new targeted schools. They're required to be identified every year. With COVID, we kind of didn't do that, but just like would happen if you guys didn't do what you needed to do, we would come and ask you to comply. The U.S. Department of Ed has done the same thing and said, remember, you have to identify these schools every year. So we will identify new targeted schools. We will not identify new ATSI schools or new comprehensive schools this year.
Okay, thank you for the federal updates. Any questions about those? Can you say again, where would we find the link to provide feedback?
Yes, let me put it in the chat.
Perfect.
Assuming my computer wants to cooperate. We've been having issues today, so. Okay, no questions about federal accountability? So there are a number of kind of ranking things that happen at the end of the APR, just to kind of give you guys a little bit of an idea of what's coming. So, we have federal identification. Now by state law, we have to rank order top 5%, bottom 5%. We also have the school turnaround program that requires us to identify schools in need of intervention. So that will happen. So we have a number of those kind of activities that all happen once we kick the APR out the door. So all of those activities will happen relatively shortly as well, because we have mandated time frame for doing so.
So the updates that you're giving us today, are we kind of the first to hear this, or is this published in like a DESE memo, or will it be?
So they're not typically published in the DESE memo. So with the changes to the comprehensive guide, for the annual performance report, we hold by law a public meeting every year because we're required to outline what the changes will be prior to implementing them 90 days in advance, right? So we actually have held multiple of those meetings this year because we had some changes to be made. And so we've given stakeholders, plus we present that every year at several conferences. So that information is available. It's on the website as well. It's I will link you to that one as well.
I do have a question.
Certainly.
So would you elaborate just a little bit more on what you said about the EOC before high school? Because generally, you know, if a student, we have most of our students take, not most, but quite a few of our students take Algebra 1 during middle school. So then when they move to high school, we would have them take Algebra 2 as an accountability measure. So are we still having them take the Algebra 2 as the
Yes.
accountability measure, or yes? Okay.
Yes.
But then we must also assess them in math and the ACT or SAT.
No, only if they have taken all of that prior to high school entry. So if you had a student, an 8th grade student who left junior high, middle school, having taken Algebra 1, Algebra 2, and geometry, then they would take ACT
so it'd be
or
all-
SAT. Yep.
Okay. Got ya. All right.
We don't have very
Thank
many
you.
of those, but we have enough that it's important to let everybody know that there are options,
you.
but that the plan no longer works. Yeah. And those kids
Okay,
are
thank
taking
you.
the ACT or SAT already, most of them. So, yeah,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
I know I sat in a meeting last week with Nancy Greeley. She's the Northwest State Supervisor.
Yeah, she's
so
great, isn't she?
Yes, she's great. They're going around to the different areas, and we had the DESE update. We had the CSIP Cycle 2 updates, and some of the big things like your CSIP progress monitoring in your buildings and all that, and what you have to put forth for the all your plan. And because they said everybody's going to get 30 points for this next year. And then the next year is when they're going to start doing that. And they're working on that now of how they're going to grade. They're not going to grade your CSIP plan anymore. They're going to monitor what you're doing.
Yep. Your implementation of the plan.
Yep. So they're going around the state doing that. But like I was at a meeting, there's only like 8 of us principals, and I know she has 50 some school districts just in the Northwest area. So it was very informative. I took a lot of notes, like the stuff you have to have in place by almost May of next year. Some of the stuff, like all your updated plans, and the big thing is getting all your stakeholders and getting your meetings back together and getting it on your school board, like reviewing it. There's a lot of stuff you have to do. And she talked about if there's, like, she said she would call us when it came out Monday before public. If there's any big red flags, your state supervisor will call and talk to you about your APR. But it was very informative and got a lot out of it.
Yeah, the area supervisors are really a great resource if you haven't accessed them. They work with schools that have been identified for comprehensive and targeted status, but they do amazing work. And part of the planning process is, we kind of, it's like working with kids. Whatever you measure is what is important to them, right? And the CSIP is required by law, but as soon as we quit reviewing it, it kind of just went by the wayside. And districts are really learning again how important it is to plan. You really just can't fly by the seat of your pants, and that planning helps everyone. It's been really fantastic to kind of watch this work occur, because districts are realizing how important that process is. And it harkens back, none of you guys are old enough, but it harkens back to the years of the original Missouri School Improvement Program, when we always reviewed the CSIP. Well, raising my hand too. I've been here since cycle 1, so there you go. but it's, you know, it's a great opportunity for our districts really to tell a more complete story of what's happening in their district. And I personally like that, because your district and your schools are so much more than numbers. Your kids are so much more than just numbers. And this is a way for them, for you as a district and as a principal or teacher, to be able to demonstrate that.
All right, well, if there's not any further questions, Jocelyn, I just want to say a big thank you, because you mentioned it's a very busy time for you all at DESE, and I mean, it's a busy time of year for everybody, but we really appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule to share with us, but also your willingness to let us ask you questions and make sure that we are understanding all this new information. So before we say goodbye, I do want to remind our members that next week we have, I think, 3 events in 1 week. We have Monday, we have our From Theory to Practice, which is implementing the K-5 science standards. Tuesday, we have Lisa Durking and Christy Bashore from DESE. They're going to share about social emotional learning updates. And then on Thursday, we have our reading success plans. So lots of stuff we're fitting in before the holiday break. So, all right. Well, thank you, everyone.
Yep. And Valerie, I'd like to take an opportunity to thank everyone who's on. I know that you're incredibly busy at this time of the year, and your littles are starting to get distracted, and if you're in an elementary building. So I know that this isn't easy for you either, and I hope that you're having a great school year and have a great holiday.
Thank you so much. All right. Goodbye, everyone. Have a great day.